check in with Vina. Sorry about that. I brought this big fancy microphone with me on the road, and sometimes it doesn't work. So if you're listening on the phone on Facebook, bear with me for just a minute. Still. Okay, we're good. Okay. Awesome. So let me go ahead. So let me start again since nobody heard me from the start. There's a lot of people talking about red wine being good for you, especially red wine, not versus, beer versus white wine, but red wine. And I want to have that discussion. What are the health benefits of wine? What are the health benefits of red wine over other kinds of wine? And at what cost, right? I'm always liking to look at the two sides of the coin, and not everything that has some benefits comes without risk. So we're here to talk about what some of those things are. So I'm Dr. Rita Marie. Welcome back to the channel, to Instagram. Wave to me if you're seeing me. I see a few people joining. Thank you. I'm going to put my chat on over here on Facebook. You can hear me now. Great. Okay. So let's talk about it. So I put out information suitable for health and wellness practitioners who want to help people using what? Using lifestyle, nutrition, natural methods, not just pharmaceuticals to cover up symptoms. And I also like to talk to people about their own health and all the things that you can do to take charge of your health without having to cover up things with drugs and surgeries. So what about red wine? Why did I choose to talk about that? Well, I got the idea from something that I was reading, actually a book that I'm listening to. I finished it, and it just gave me the thoughts of sharing some of the research out there. So we hear a lot about red wine and red wine being good for the heart. Red wine contains what's called polyphenols. But red wine isn't the only food that contains polyphenols. It's actually in the skins of the grapes. And there's one in particular that gets touted all the time as being beneficial from red wine, which is resveratrol. You might have heard of resveratrol. You might have heard that it's a really good antioxidant, that it's really good and protective of the blood vessel linings. However, here's what's happened. The studies that look at resveratrol don't tell you how much most of the time, or the big newscasts, the studies you need to. But the news, when it makes the news, when it makes CNN, when it makes Wall Street Journal or whatever, they don't tell you that most of the studies that were done to show the beneficial effects of resveratrol from wine, you had to be drinking an enormous amount of wine. And I don't just mean like 2 or 3 glasses a night. I'm talking of like 2 or 3 bottles. And some of the studies that I saw reported said 200 bottles to get the benefits. And like 200 bottles, whoa. What about the downsides? So I believe that whenever we're looking at a food, at a beverage, at a substance, as to whether it's good for us or not good for us, we have to look at both sides. We have to look at the double-edged sword, right? You have to look at what's good about it, what's not so good about it, and are the benefits worth the downside? Are the benefits that we get from drinking red wine in this particular case, because that's what we're talking about it, do they outweigh the risks? And that's what I want to discuss with you tonight. We all have to make our own decisions. When I grew up, red wine was common. We grew up in an Italian family, and we always had a jug of red wine on the table for dinner. This was common. I thought everybody did. Turned out that wasn't so true, but that's what we did in our family. So I got exposed to sipping and tasting red wine when I was a wee little thing. And we were even allowed to have a little bit in our glass. Teenager, you know how it gets when you be a teenager, I wanted to experiment more. And I started to, sneak in, grab some of the red wine and have some of it before going out with my friends, and then go out and have more wine with the friends. So are the benefits worth the risks? So resveratrol, where do we get resveratrol? And some of the other polyphenols that are in wine, well, they're abundant in plant foods that are colorful. So grapes are the source in the wine. So yeah, they're fermented, right? So does that make it good or bad? Does it make it better or worse than the grapes? Well, let's look at that. If you want to get the resveratrol and you want to get all the polyphenols from the wine, what about if you ate grapes? Well, you might say, well, grapes are high glycemic. Grapes are going to raise my blood sugar. Well, so is the wine. We talked about that in our last week's episode. The alcohol causes metabolic issues. The alcohol causes a raise in blood sugar very quickly. In addition, it puts a load on the liver because the liver then has to detoxify. There's an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase. Some of us are born with a genetic imbalance, or not so much imbalance, but just a genetic marker that the alcohol dehydrogenase is not in high enough amounts to really break down that alcohol. We know that some people actually break down other carbohydrate foods and form alcohol, and they become drunk from eating fruit and it fermenting in the gut. But how do we know? Should we, if we want the benefits of resveratrol, do we need to drink the wine or not? So let me tell you a few little things that you get to decide whether you think the wine is a health food or not a health food. So according to like the Mayo Clinic and other places like that, a moderate drinker is someone who has 1 glass of wine or beer a night. To me, that's not a moderate drinker. That's a regular drinker. And that could be somebody that has a problem with drinking. In another study, they said that moderate drinkers were drinkers who drank 3 or less glasses of wine a week. And here's what that study showed, that there was a 14 to 16%, I believe, increased risk of breast cancer in women who had 3 or less glasses of wine a week. More of an increase the more wine that they had. So I look and say, well, what's the other risk factors for breast cancer? Do I have genetic factors that predispose me? Do I have exposures that predispose me? Do I have a family history of breast cancer? Am I eating sugar? Am I drinking caffeine? You want to look at all those other things that contribute to breast cancer and think, is it worth it to have some extra resveratrol at the expense of increasing the risk of breast cancer? Right? So what else? So alcohol messes with the brain. Alcohol actually damages brain cells. And over time, we lose some of our cognitive ability if you're drinking on a regular basis. Do we want that? Alcohol thins the lining of the digestive tract. It actually damages the mucosal barrier, makes it thinner, which can lead to things like intestinal hyperpermeability, leaky gut. It can lead to things like ulcer and the symptoms that occur with reflux when there's too thin of a mucus lining to protect. Do we want to risk that to get a little extra resveratrol? And are you drinking enough wine? Are you willing to drink enough wine? Can you drink enough wine? Can you afford to drink enough wine to get the amount of resveratrol that's going to be protective? Other foods like berries, cranberries, and blueberries have resveratrol as well. Do we have to make a wine out of them in order to do that? Do we have to ferment them? You know, in a lot of cases, fermenting foods is good, right? If we take some kind of milk or non-dairy milk or even dairy milk and we ferment it, we create yogurt. We can create kefir. We can create buttermilk. We can create things that have probiotic cultures in it. Unfortunately, that's not what happens with alcohol, right? We get this substance that then numbs the senses, and it's very addictive. Alcohol is very addictive. So if you drink your glass of wine at the end of the day, in order to calm yourself down, you think about the risk factor. Is it, you know, it's always that scale, right? Do the benefits outweigh the risk? What are the downsides of alcohol? Well, it impairs your senses. We all know that, right? We all know that you get giggly and giddy. And don't drive a car if you've had alcohol. Unfortunately, people do, because alcohol is considered a normal part of society. And people are getting out there and they're getting behind the wheel of the car and they're killing people as a result. That's not worth the risk, right? And what if I'm just going to have a casual couple of drinks, I'll be fine, I have somebody else to drive me home. But what if something happens and you have to be the one that gets behind the wheel, right? I personally don't think it's worth the risk. So I'll give you my own personal history with alcohol. I got exposed as a kid and then as a teenager, and I drank too much of it. And I went out to the park with the friends on the weekends, and I drank too much wine. And I sometimes came home and, wasn't in such good shape. I thought I was hiding it from my mother, but I apparently wasn't. I have been in situations where in drinking too much wine, I lost my senses and I may have said things that were embarrassing or done things that were embarrassing. So I decided that I was just going to give it up as I learned and researched and found out the negative effects on brain cells, the negative effects on liver, the tendency towards cirrhosis over time, cirrhosis, thickening, hardening of the liver cells, the effect on the digestive tract, the effect on blood sugar, raising that blood sugar. And I decided to just quit. And I went cold turkey on quitting. It wasn't like I was an alcoholic and had to go to AA or do any of that. I just had a mind over matter. Like, I looked at the negative sides and I looked at the positive sides, and I said, I could still have fun. I can still be giddy and a laugh. I just have to decide that I'm going to do that, even when I'm not drinking. And the risk of addiction is real, right? Alcohol is the most dangerous addictive drug that is legal, that is condoned. It's actually, you're considered a little weird if you don't drink. 87% of the population, adult population, drinks alcohol. So those of us who don't are looked at as, oh, you have a problem. Oh, did you quit for a reason, etc. When we look at the studies with the red wine, we look at, is there a decreased risk of heart disease in people who are moderate drinkers? We're not talking heavy drinkers. By the standards that were set, moderate drinkers was one drink or less a day. Personally, I think that's kind of on the heavy side, right? And so when we look at that, they compared groups, they compared heavy drinkers with moderate drinkers. And of course, there was a protective effect in moderate drinkers. But when they compared the moderate drinkers to non-drinkers, they didn't differentiate people who are non-drinkers because they used to be drinkers. They were alcoholics and now they aren't anymore. They had some sort of disease, some sort of cancer or surgical thing where they were told they couldn't drink anymore. So we don't really have good numbers on that. I think a couple of drinks a year at somebody's